Pass on what you have learned.
From a galaxy far, far away, this is the Generations of Star Wars podcast.
This is the Generations of Star Wars podcast. We are on Facebook. Look up Go Star Wars, Twitter at Go Star Wars, and Instagram
at Go Star Wars 2016.
I am Scott.
And I am Dante.
So this is an introduction show. I'm Scott. I am the father of 5 Padawans, the oldest of which is Dante. I grew up in the original trilogy, very young. I've seen all 3 of the OT movies in the theater, and I have tried to spread Star Wars as best I can with all of my children. And Dante is my oldest. He is... How old are you now?
I'm 17 right now.
Okay. And he is finishing his high school year, and he's also at the same time entering his sophomore year of college.
Well, that's...
Sort of?
I might be doing junior year next year. I don't really know.
You're like a
We'll
sophomore
figure that
/ junior in
I'm
college.
a sophomore, junior in college, and a senior in high school.
Yeah, so
basically, I'm complicated.
But you know what? That's great. I would rather him be complicated and be outreaching me. And if we're trying to, slice up those details, then he's doing something right. So that's great. And that's the dynamic here. It's a father and son podcast, and there's 4 others behind you. You can be replaced.
Yeah, eventually. A brother and 3 sisters, so, one after the other. You're never going to run out of kids to do this podcast with.
That's right. And we plan on doing it even if and when you do leave the home. So that's the plan. But what we want to talk about tonight is kind of our background, how we came into Star Wars. And again, the podcast is called The Generations of Star Wars. It's also called, for short, Go Star Wars. G-O, Generations of Star Wars. And what we want to do is communicate how Star Wars itself has a generational aspect. Lucas himself has said that. Many who have analyzed it have exposed how it's a generational story within itself. But also within the fandom, it's a very generational, friendly art form or story. And that's how we came to be. I wouldn't be here if my father didn't take me to see Star Wars, didn't buy me the Betamax and VHS tapes of Star Wars, Empire, Jedi, and if I didn't pass on in DVD form to Dante, and since then Blu-ray and digital download versions to his younger siblings, the Star Wars movies, and now since Clone Wars, Rebels, we have 3 functionally in this household, 3 generations of Star Wars.
Yeah, and it's been really interesting seeing that growth of not only the lore of Star Wars, but how different generations see Star Wars differently because of it. And so, for example, because Dad grew up in the old trilogy, that's his niche. but I was born later that year, but born the year that episode 1 came out. My bad.
Yep. That's right.
And so I grew up with the prequels and Clone Wars, and so that was like my new Star Wars. So having a different view because of that is very interesting, especially just talking about Star Wars with Dad, and then having the girls that are growing up with this new trilogy and stuff like Rogue One and Rebels is also going to be very interesting, and it's really kind of a fun process to just see the different viewpoints based on where in this lore you were born.
Yeah, and for our household, based on what you just said, it's interesting because you're the oldest, and then there's Sylvan, he's the next oldest. And then all 3 of our girls, your sisters, and now they're coming into, they're receiving the end of Clone Wars, the beginning of Rebels, and they're receiving Rogue One and Episode 7. So they get the new trilogy, they get the new animation, the end of the old animation, and they get Rogue One.
They get Star Wars stories now too, which is like each generation they add something new.
Yeah.
Like you had movies,
Yep.
I had movies and TV shows, and now they have movies, the movie trilogies, the TV shows, and the movie standalones.
True. And what's interesting is that they get these strong female characters, which is the characters are rich in quality, and one of the things that I was just pointing out this past week, because with Rey we were watching episode 7, and it's one of my favorite moments of the entire film, in fact, and it's based on her character development, when they are facing the Rathtars on the freighter, and she makes the move that shuts the door, that slices the tentacle and frees Finn, and he gets up and he says, he's freaking out. He's like, the door and she's like, yeah, that was lucky. She didn't take any credit for it, but it was like a team move, and she just wanted to move on. That's what I'm talking about. Is like, it's so interesting how they're trying to make the development on all the characters about bettering the universe around them.
Yeah, and I think they did something really good with Jin too, in that she because Rey is part of a trilogy. Let's admit that she doesn't get too much in this in 7.
Yep.
As far as character development or
Right.
backstory. With Jin, because it's a standalone film, we get a fully fleshed character, and she has her flaws. So I don't think Disney's afraid to give their female characters flaws either, but because they know how to make a real person on screen. I think that's something that they did really well with Jin in Rogue One specifically, and it was really nice to see how she was able to build that team around her, and ultimately get the Death Star plans.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. So let's talk about Star Wars and how we came into it. So for myself, I was born in 1974. So I was very young when Star Wars came out. I was taken to the cinema to see it, the movie, and the only thing I can remember from that viewing was that I remember Darth Vader, whom I remember as Dark Vader, cutting Obi-Wan down, and I thought that he had turned him into chocolate. The robes were on the floor. I thought that was chocolate. Partly that was analogous to how I had viewed The Wizard of Oz and The Wicked Witch. So, I mean, there's some corollary thoughts there from how I had viewed those things as a child. But after that, when Empire came out, and I saw Empire in the theater with my father, and it rocked my world, because by that time I had seen A New Hope again. I had seen it on probably HBO. We had cable TV, and that was new. We had recorded it on Betamax from the television. I had my action figures. I had the 12-inch record, The Story of Star Wars. I bought the Story of The Empire Strikes back when it came out. I played those records endlessly with my action figures. That's how we did Star Wars. And then I begged and begged and begged to see Return of the Jedi when it came out. And my father took me again and again, and I saw it about 3 times in the theater. And then it was the story of the Return of the Jedi on record with action figures, and that's what you had. A wonderful audio narration, action figures, narration on albums, waiting, VHS. Now I can watch it as much as I want. And you got so much more. When you came around, Dante, Phantom Menace, well, you had been a part of Phantom Menace in the womb, which I'm sure jacked up your midichlorian count. And then you were a toddler when these came out in VHS, and VHS was giving way to DVD, and then I got those. And then you had the Clone Wars, the original Clone Wars series, which you're going to review because that was a big part of your childhood, and you'll talk about that. But talk about your childhood, your earliest memories coming into Star Wars.
Well, I know that I was born the year of Episode 1. I don't really remember anything from the womb viewing, but
Or should you?
But no, my first memory. Well, I'll start with there was never a moment where it's like, oh my word, Darth Vader is Luke's father. That was always ingrained in me. I can't remember a first viewing of the original trilogy, or for that matter, the prequel trilogy. I can't remember a first viewing. It was always ingrained in me so much that there was never a surprise that Darth Vader was Luke's father, or that Anakin Skywalker became Darth Vader. It was never a surprise because it was part of me.
Interesting.
And
I should have brokered that better.
My first memory, I think, was walking through Walmart, and I saw Episode 3 on DVD, because I think I asked you to go to the theaters. I might have, and you were like, it was a little dark.
Oh yeah, there's no way. Yeah.
And I saw it on the shelves in Walmart, and I was like, Dad, we need to get that. And you said another time, and you did get it eventually. And then I also remember one time I tricked my babysitter into watching Episode 3.
Nice. I remember that.
She was
Oh,
like,
yeah.
Are you sure you should be watching this? I'm like, yeah. And I was watching, like, I was all into, like, Palpatine just
Yes.
electrocuting Mace.
That's
And she turned it off, and I was all guilty. That was pretty good.
That's working the Force for your favor. Yeah.
But other than that, I remember obviously seeing the films. It was just part of me, and because of that, the things that people don't like about the prequels don't bother me nearly as much. I can see them as just watching them as a film, but they have a place for me nostalgically, and I've also been growing up in the period of CGI, because basically when I was born, there was the birth of CGI, and from there it was like CGI high, and then right now it's kind of back to practical along with CGI a lot in most films.
Yeah, most filmmakers are trying to find that balance.
And it's a tough balance, but some have done better than others.
Yeah.
And I remember watching constantly the behind the scenes of the prequels, not the originals.
Right.
I would sit there with the special edition DVDs that had the second DVD that was devoted to like, it must have been like 6 hours of bonus features or more. And I would sit there and I would flip through and I would watch every single one.
Yeah.
Every single one over and over and over and over and over.
Yeah.
And because of that, I got a love for film, and I always loved the environment there. And because of that, I'm pursuing right now a major in communications media. But that was like a big part for me, was watching the behind the scenes and seeing how these things were made, and a love for that process was born in me because of Star Wars, and also a love for the soundtrack through John Williams, who is brilliant. And I remember Duel of Fates, and those themes were always a part of my life. But the new Star Wars during my generation was the Clone Wars. And, well, before I talk about the Clone Wars, I got to talk about Tartakovsky's Clone Wars, which I will be heading a review of. It is the 2003 Star Wars Clone Wars series, which had 2 seasons. It is no longer canon, sadly, but it has part of my heart dedicated to it.
Sure.
Because it is fantastic. And it's not to be confused with Dave Filoni's, which was the new Clone Wars that ran from 2008 to 2014, which is the Clone Wars that I grew up with. But we'll be diving into Tartakovsky's Clone Wars.
Yeah, other than Shaggy, it's in my head canon. So
Shaggy's in my head canon too. He lost Scooby. But I want to talk about Filoni's Clone Wars because that was the Star Wars that I grew up with. And I remember sitting in our old house with my brother Sylvan, who watched it with me, and we would sit it was like Friday night, and then it switched to Saturday on Cartoon Network. We would sit there and be like eagerly awaiting the next episode of Clone Wars. And I remember a few episodes specifically. I remember one was the episode that Darth Maul came back. I was like, Dad, you got to watch this.
Yes, you were expecting me to be happy about this.
Which ultimately, I mean, it turned out pretty good.
It did. I it's one of those things where, before I hand the baton back off to you, I grew up in the original trilogy. Then we had the dark times. The times when no films were made. And then there were the prequels. But in between, there was a period where literature was made. Most notably, and right off the bat, was the Thrawn trilogy and some other wonderful works of literature. And there was a work between Empire and Jedi, and there were comic books.
Shadows of the Empire.
Yeah, right. There were some wonderful works, but they very quickly, in my estimation, had gotten off track in the sense that it didn't feel like they were all being guided by not just Pablo, but the story group's doing a phenomenal job. And I guess that's my point, is that with the new canon, there is a guiding group of individuals, and it's not just Pablo. He's the public figure, and we all like ask him questions, and I get it, and he does a great job of not being annoyed by us, or at least not showing his annoyance. But they guide it. They want to make it cohere. They want to make sure that multiple story types aren't being told, that the same formulas aren't being recycled, and that the characters are being given their full weight and their full impact that they could have. And that clearly wasn't happening before. And I understand the people that have invested in all the reading and all the books of the old EU. I understand that. I tuned out not long after the Thrawn trilogy. I love the Thrawn trilogy, and read some of the comic books, and other materials, and then it started to get a little weird, and I didn't think that it felt like it had the same gravitas, and so I tuned out. That's when I tuned out, and then I just kind of waited, and then the Clone Wars came out, and I was like, I don't know, is this important to George? Is it any more important than the books were? I kind of waited to see, and then once the property was sold to Disney, I understood very quickly. They made it very clear to me that they were going to invest in this, and that's when I got really on board.
Yeah, and I think that Disney has done a really good job so far. I'm really excited, although the part of me, because I grew up in the prequel era and Clone Wars, that has a very special place in my heart, and I'm waiting for the day that they go back.
Yeah.
And I'm quite honestly, I'm kind of scared that they might not for a long time because of all the hardcore fans that like the old trilogy better. And I love the old trilogy, but there's a place in my heart for the prequels, and I'm kind of waiting for the day that they go back.
They're dipping back, which is great, with Thrawn and with other characters.
Yeah.
So
but
I think they will.
Even like I listened to Catalyst, and Catalyst goes over the span of, it goes through the Republic, through the transformation into the Empire, and then the Empire. And at one point in the book, they're surrounded by battle droids, and you have the sound effects of the battle droids and everything.
Right.
And my nostalgia crept in, and it was like, oh, that's my era. That's my Star Wars.
Right. Yep.
So hearing that, I was knowing that Disney could do that and do it properly. I really want them to go back. But with going back to Clone Wars, I love that series so much, and it got better and better each season.
Sure.
Even me and my best friend would watch it and kind of like discuss it, and even now, like, we'll go back and watch parts of it on Netflix, and I love that it's all on Netflix. We'll go back and watch series, like together. We watched the Onderon series, 4-episode series before Rogue One came out, because we knew that Saw would be in it. And so all that to say that I enjoy Rebels, but it's not as much as Clone Wars, just because of the impact that Clone Wars had on me. And I'm really looking forward to when Obi-Wan shows up on Rebels, even though it's going to be Ben. I'm still excited.
Right. On that, and well.
Oh, and one more thing before we move on. Fun fact: my first Star Wars movie in theaters was Episode 7.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
That's
so
right.
I grew up in the prequel era, but my first Star Wars film in theaters that I remember watching was Episode 7. And I remember specifically that we went to opening night, early showing on Thursday, IMAX 3D, and we got a little treat from, was it the manager of the theater? I forget who it was.
One of the managers.
He played a song that he had made. It was a solid 6-minute song for the entirety of Star Wars and
with
making Star Wars history.
Guitar and the whole thing.
It was great.
But you're wrong. The first movie you saw in the theaters was Clone Wars.
We don't talk about that one.
Oh, but you didn't remember that.
Well,
and now you do.
Well, yeah, I can actually, you're right. I did see that in theaters. I saw it in theaters twice.
At least
Twice,
once.
maybe?
I think once.
I remember I
Maybe
saw it
twice.
somehow.
I don't know.
Was it straight to DVD? It had a limited theater. I don't remember exactly.
It didn't take long to get to DVD, but
because I remember seeing it, and then I remember afterwards going with one of my friends to his birthday party, which was a showing of that in a theater. I don't even remember where that was. It was and I remembered I was supposed to not tell him that I had seen it already.
Oh,
and
okay.
I totally did. And it was like I
Interesting.
told him, but it all kind of came out.
Interesting.
But I remember that. So you're right, but
it doesn't
first
quite count.
Trilogy movie.
Yeah, it doesn't
that
quite
I saw
count.
was Episode 7.
So I just thought I would jab you with that, but All right. Well, anyway, so that's kind of how we are, and I will say that I had been initially very very much for the prequels, and then I kind of had some time where I kind of backed away from them. Thought after having some time watching Phantom Menace and then Attack of the Clones, which I watched Attack of the Clones probably more. I know I watched it more in the theater than any of the others, and also analyzed it more on VHS and DVD right when that was available. And I wanted to love it, and I watched it more because it was there, it was available, and I still kind of like it. I think I like it more than most people do. I know it's in the chain of all the films, it ends up being the one that people like the least, which is fine. I get it, especially the Padme and Anakin interaction. But I don't count that as much against the movie. I think the Jedi battle in Geonosis outweighs that. I think the development of the clone army with Jango Fett outweighs that. I think the chase scene in the beginning and the reintroduction of Anakin with Padme and with Obi-Wan outweighs that. And it's that one thing, that one blight of that interaction that really ends up doing the film in. But I'm trying to give you my sense of how I weigh in on the prequels, because Dante came into the he came in on the prequels, and then when he saw the warts, he saw it with the OT, and then every time he's seen the OT, it was like, wow, that's great. Like there's no major warts with the OT other than the ones that everyone mocks. So he's able to see that as it is, and with the prequel trilogy, I think people have overdone it. And so I was originally kind of like, and I'm not a big Jar Jar fan, but I'm not a Jar Jar hater in the sense that I don't think Jar Jar is a reason to not like the prequel trilogy. I think I'll make fun of him with everyone else. I'm happy to.
I think that Anakin and Padme's romance is, though.
Right. Yes. Yes.
Like
yes.
I like the prequels. I grew up with them. I like the prequels a lot. But some of that romance is cringy. Like it's bad. It's pretty bad.
I think the worst of it's not in Attack of the Clones, but the worst of it's probably in Revenge of the Sith. Well, that one little scene on the landing is really awful.
But there's also I hate sand. It gets everywhere.
That's correct.
Horrid.
Yes, it's bad. It's bad.
But the rest of the movie, I do like a lot of the rest of the movie.
I think Attack of the Clones is fine, and
it's still the bottom of my list.
Yeah, I agree. Okay. I agree.
If we're going by movies, I gotta put Star Wars Clone Wars movie at right at the same level, because
we're not counting that.
That was pretty bad. But the lowest on my list of trilogies movies is gonna be Episode 2.
Yeah, I agree, but I just think it's the lowness of that it's a high floor.
Oh yeah, it's still
a much higher floor than people give it credit for. Yeah. And so, that's all I'm saying is that for the prequels, and for someone who grew up and was born in the OT, like the prequels are not that bad, and the worst part of them, it's kind of like whatever, it should not be something that you get hung up on.
I do, however, remember a certain story that you told me about your Star Wars life.
Okay.
In college.
Okay.
I remember that you told me that you would watch Episode 5 every day.
And actually, it was before college.
Was it? Okay.
We're talking
every single day.
We're talking right before middle school years.
To the point where you could quote the whole movie.
Yes, Episode 5. Literally in the crawl, it talks about Darth Vader being obsessed with finding young Skywalker. I asked my mother what the word obsessed meant, and she said, well, it means it has something to do with where that's all that your mind is focused on, kind of like you with this movie. And I said, oh, okay, I got it. And I went down and I watched the movie. So lesson learned, lesson not learned, lesson learned.
Yeah.
But
I
anyway.
just remember you telling me that story. And
Yes. I watched it every day for a year.
I have yet to live up to that expectation, but I might do it.
I watched on the calendar to make sure I watched it 365 days in a row on VHS. You can only imagine what that copy looked like by that last viewing.
Oh, you were wishing for a DVD then.
Right.
You didn't even know what a DVD was.
It hadn't been invented yet, so we hadn't even gotten to see CD yet, really. At least it wasn't in vogue. Mm-hmm. All right, so that's kind of where we have come from. So let's see if we can find out who you are and where you've come from. Now let's move on to a little bit more of what's current right now. And I also, before we get to that, I would like to welcome anyone who's listening to this to please send in audio, MP3 or other format. It's better if it's MP3 files of any way that you would like to introduce our news segment. We'll start there. But and I will play your way of relaying that. You can use things like Lando, hello, what have we here? Or Luke in A New Hope, when he goes, what, how? Any of the ways, lines from any of the films where someone's signaling some kind of new information coming in, send in your version of you doing a voiceover of them. Don't send clips from the film. Everything on our show, we're trying to keep it all original, and I'll get into that later in another episode.
A voiceover or a sound effect.
Yeah, or sound
both.
effect. Let's try to keep it all original. And you'll appreciate that more too when you pull it off and we play it. But we want to keep that all original. So, but right now, let's focus on one thing. I want every week, I want to have a new sound file of the news. Again, it can be Lando doing hello, what have we here? Or Luke, what, how? Or something else. Send it to me. Send it to generationsofstarwars@gmail.com. And we'll put it on the show the next time around. And with that, let's talk about the news. And we're going to keep it brief today because this is an introduction show. So before we get to Rebels, I want to talk about the new, one of the new items, which has to do with Carrie Fischer and the statement put out by Star Wars. It's on the StarWars.com website, a statement regarding new rumors. And this has to do with Carrie Fisher's passing and how we have no knowledge, at least no definitive knowledge on what's going to happen in episode 8 or 9. But what we do know is what they've posted on StarWars.com. And that is that they are definitively not going to pursue digitally recreating Carrie Fisher's performance as Princess or General Leia Organa. How do you feel about that, Dante?
Quite honestly, I'm glad. I feel like the digital recreation could be overused, and I'm glad that Disney knows the place, their place.
Right.
And I don't want filmmaking to become this thing where you get your face scanned and then we're constantly recreating old actors because we feel like it. It's happened a few times, and I'm pretty happy with the way that they've used it so far. for example, in Fast and Furious, they recreated. I don't know his name right off the top of my head, but the actor that passed away during filmmaking as like an homage to his character,
Right.
because he's been in the franchise for so long. They did it in Civil War with Tony Stark and Robert Downey Jr. De-aging him
Right.
for his presentation, and they've used it for Tarkin and Leia in Rogue One. So
True.
I'm kind of glad with how they've used it so far, and I'm not just Disney, but films in general. And I'm
Right.
hoping that it doesn't become a huge thing where they're completely recreating an actor that's been dead for 50 years, you know. And I'm glad that they're not recreating her. And I'm also glad that we're going to see her in episode 8, because production wrapped long before Carrie had passed away. So I'm glad that she was finished, and that we'll be able to see her final film.
Yeah, I agree. I think that in this film particularly, because they did it with Star Wars in Rogue One with Tarkin and Carrie Fisher before she passed away, that if they do it now, also it could set a precedent to where it becomes the norm. And I think they're trying to take the higher ground and saying, oh, if you do it for the right reasons. Do it for, first of all, let's look. Peter Cushing's estate, they signed off on this.
They were happy about it.
They were happy about it. There was no, it wasn't.
But he also wasn't a main character. Like,
Right.
if he had been a main character, he was sort of like a secondary main villain.
You mean in Rogue One?
Yes.
Well, he was like the main supporting character.
What I mean though is he's not on screen for ages. He's on there
Correct.
like 15 minutes. So
Right.
it's not like we have a completely recreated actor on screen
Right.
as much as like the Rogue One team or something like that.
Right.
So I'm glad about that.
Yeah, I think outside of the main characters, meaning the main team that all gets mowed down, Baze, Chirrut,
And
Jin, Cassian, and so K2, and so on and so forth, and beyond that main group, he's the main character. Even more than Krennic, because in some sense, I mean, well, right there with Krennic, at least, right there with Krennic.
He's right there with him, but he's
Yeah.
not more than Krennic in this
Well,
film.
I think he's more.
He is
He take-
overall, because he becomes a bigger thing in episode 4.
He takes
but
over the
he's-
Death Star
he's-
from him.
That doesn't make it a main character in Rogue One, though. And
Well-
so in Rogue One, Krennic does take
Let's say
over him.
Let's say this. Would you be willing to say that they're on even footing, and by the end of the movie, the handoff is done and Tarkin takes over, which segues into A New Hope?
Yeah, I would be able
Okay,
to say that.
we can agree on that. So he's at least that much of a presence, and he wasn't even alive. And Ben Mendelsohn is a pretty darn good actor, and in the middle of his career, and he has a lot, of years ahead of him, we hope. So that being said, he was a pretty strong presence in the movie, though.
Yeah, and I think that's warranted, and I'm glad that they did that.
I think it
because
worked.
I talked about this in our Rogue One review, but I didn't want Darth Vader to take over.
No, me either.
I think they did it well, and I think that I'm glad that they're not pursuing recreating Carrie Fisher at this point.
Me too.
And it really is possible to get a a recast for, like, if they're trying to do like a younger Princess Leia, they don't need to recreate her digitally.
Right.
They can recast her like they're doing for the Han Solo movie.
Right.
Or they can do like animation like they did on Rebels and stuff like that. So there are ways to get around not having her available.
Right. And would you also how would you feel about this thought that with the timing of Rogue One and what they did with Tarkin and with Carrie Fisher, that it could seem a little bit, even without what they're saying they're not going to do with episodes 8 and 9, that it could seem, even by now with what they've done, that they're opening the doors for it. And that's why I'm glad they're taking this stand, is that they're not just saying, okay, just do it with any actor that's either old or has passed, and recreate them. But let's think about this.
Yeah. And I feel the same way.
That's all I'm saying. I don't want them to just open the floodgates and start recreating characters. I think actors are artists, and
it's job security for them too.
Right. And as artists, and I've heard someone talk about how, okay, well, this is the age where as an actor you get scanned and try to, catalog all of your physical, anything that can be measured physically so that you can be recreated for your estate. And I understand that. I get it. I think it's for the estate of someone, an actor, a fine actor that passes on. It's a really wise investment, but I don't think it's the best practice for film. Maybe I could be wrong. Maybe 50 years from now, I'm going to look like a fool, and maybe they're going to have all these actors, the ones that are young today, and I'm just pulling names out of a hat. Benedict Cumberbatch, and you have, the guy that's going to be Han Solo, and you have all
the Nine Rich.
Yes, and you're going to all these young actors, and they're just going to have their faces, their nuances cataloged, and they're going to pass it on to their children to be able to. Is that going to make better movies? I don't know. I kind of hope not, but I think if it's there to fix something that's retrospectively that, where someone has passed on, that's different. But
I think it's a good decision, to have any actor scanned at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Because for the reason of if they pass during
Heath Ledger.
Yes. Well, I mean, he finished what he was doing with The Dark Knight, though.
Brandon Lee with The Crow.
Yeah, for if you pass during filmmaking,
right?
It's security that you will be able to finish
your film.
You'll still be in the film. They can finish the film.
That might become normal practice.
I think that is a good decision. What I don't think is a good decision
that might become
is
normal.
Recreating them in movies after that. So say that they're making, I don't know, maybe for some weird reason,
30 years from now,
they're making some trilogy, and the actor passes away, say mid filmmaking in the second movie. What I do think should happen is that he gets recreated for the rest of the film. What I don't think should happen is that he's recreated for the third, if that makes sense.
Right.
And I think that's going to be really difficult, even especially if it's the main actor. But I don't think that should become the norm. And I think there's times when it could be used like Tarkin, where it's you kind of need this character for this film, but he's not going to be a heavy.
You're carrying on the continuity of
so
something
it's just
that
to
came
keep
before
continuity,
right?
And I absolutely agree that you need the approval of the estate. Don't do it in the wrong way behind their backs. But I think that this is a good thing, and I think that it could be and probably will be overused once other companies start to do it besides Disney, start to do it successfully and at as large of a scale as Rogue One did.
Right.
But I think that overall the movie making community hopefully understands the limits and where the limits should be. And I'm hoping that they'll keep it there. Yeah.
I just don't want to see them run wild with this and do the wrong things with it. I think that, I think we're on the same page. I mean, fix a movie if you have to. Recreate something down the road that you couldn't to continue it, but other than that, leave it alone. So that's that bit of news. And before we get to a little bit of a splash towards your corner of these podcasts moving forward about you're going to talk about at least for the next few podcasts, the old Clone Wars series. Before we get to a little bit of your overview and kind of a little bit of a teaser of that, I want to talk about the latest episode of Rebels. This is the first episode of the second half of season 3.
The third. There was Ghost of Geonosis.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, the third episode. Sorry, the Ghost of Geonosis.
Part 1 and 2.
Yes, is 1 and 2, and this is episode 3. You're right.
So
The first standalone, not sequential episode.
Yeah.
So this will be the third episode of season 3 of the second half of season 3 of Rebels.
Yeah, and just real quick, so that everyone knows, I will put on YouTube a link in the description to after we've done
Right.
the Rebels talk. So if you don't want spoilers, you can just click that link and you'll be able to jump.
And this
right after that.
episode is called Warhead. The episode takes place, other than a few interactions in space and on Star Destroyers, the entirety of the episode takes place on Adelon, where the Rebel base is. And it opens very early on with a scene with some character design for the droid, the main droid, the Imperial droid, which we see as the original concept design by Ralph McQuarrie for C-3PO, which is also in the same painting that we see the original design for what we now know as Chopper, because he has arms, but it was C-3PO and R2D2, and in the background there's we have the pod, which was jettisoned from would have been jettisoned from the Corvette, and that design by Ralph McQuarrie has been very iconic. Like of all of Ralph's designs, it's one of the ones you see more often.
That and the original Luke versus Darth Vader. With
Right.
The
Yep.
skinnier lightsabers.
Yep.
Was the main two.
So that character design has now come, and I knew it right away when I saw it. I was like, "Oh, that's the original C-3PO," which was interesting seeing that design with Chopper.
Yeah, I didn't really pick up on Chopper until I just now saw the picture, and then that's kind of cool. I really liked the fact that they used Ralph McQuarrie's original, because they rave a lot in behind the scenes of the movies and the shows and everything about Ralph McQuarrie's original sketches and Ralph McQuarrie's original drawings, because they are beautiful. They are very beautiful, and
Absolutely.
he was heavily influential in creating this world, especially in the old trilogy. In the old trilogy specifically, before his passing, specifically just making it feel real,
Right.
adding details and stuff like that. So his original design for C-3PO was so influential, and I'm really glad that they're bringing all these little things from Ralph's original designs into the main canon. And it's even cooler that he can grow and kill things.
Yeah, that droid, and even Filoni, when I was watching Rebels Recon, was talking about how I think he was saying if he had time, he would like to have made the aggressor version of this droid be a little more similar even than he already was to K2 SO from Rogue One. And when I was watching the episode, I thought, wow, this in the aggressive like combat version of this droid, he looks and seems very similar to K2SO in that style of Imperial droid.
Yeah, I feel like they probably took elements, just talking from within the lore. It makes sense that the Empire would recycle ideas, and designs for these droids that they've made, because
Right.
quite honestly, all of them are tall. We have the Imperial Guard droids that have showed up on Rebels a few times.
Yep.
We have K2SO's Imperial, whatever they're called, models, and the Infiltrator droid now.
Right.
So they have elements that follow through with all of them, and I think that just makes sense story-wise, that the Empire would recycle good ideas and keep using them, just put them for different uses and in different places.
How'd you feel about the episode overall?
I thought it was a good self-contained episode. It was a really good episode that's there to obviously pay homage to Ralph, but also just a fill-in almost. There are, with any TV show, you're gonna have fill-in episodes,
Right.
especially Rebels, because you can't. It's very difficult to keep in a universe this vast, this main story, and keep it interesting. And they have like 3 different main story arcs going on.
I had
throughout
high
the season,
hopes.
so
I had high hopes for AP5, and I thought he let me down this episode. I thought he was more annoying. He became C-3PO
yeah,
for me in this episode, and I wanted originally when AP5 turned and came to join the Rebels, I liked him, and I thought, oh man, he's just talking. I don't know. I it just didn't work for me for some reason.
yeah.
His character.
I mean, I wasn't really expecting much from him as a character. I just kind of like, the droid that's trying to do droid things, and because that's kind of annoying a little bit. Just like, trying to be super formal with the inventory taking and stuff. So I wasn't really expecting much.
Right.
So when I didn't get too much, I wasn't really disappointed. I was kind of like, that's what I was thinking.
I mean, couldn't they have done this episode with just Chopper and Zeb and the Imperial droid?
Yeah. I feel like AP is probably in there just because when else are you going to put him in there? Like, he doesn't really get too much light to shine because they can't use him too much, so it makes sense that they would throw him in here. I mean, and I thought it was all right. Yeah,
The only thing I could
for me, he
figure,
didn't really add or take away much.
yeah, the only thing is the language barrier, where I thought like he could communicate with Chopper, he could communicate with this droid, and he could communicate with Zeb. That's the only thing I got. It was like, okay, well, if that's the
They Zeb and
How it
Chopper could
works.
have got along fine without him.
right.
It wasn't a huge deal for me. He was just kind of there, and I'm like, all right, whatever.
Feels like they're forcing it a little bit, but it's not the end of the world. I mean, if that's the worst decision they make in Rebels this season, it's nitpicking.
I won't go back to that episode, but I felt that there was a worse episode already. But,
Oh yeah.
But yeah, I thought it was all right for a filler episode. It was decent.
Okay.
I thought
Yeah.
it was pretty good. I liked the droid a lot.
I liked
and I liked that.
I like the intrigue that it added between Fulcrum / Callus and what's going on with him and Thrawn, and it did propel the character of Thrawn at the end. That was the payoff.
Yeah, the payoff was the
that was
Thrawn and
worth it.
Callus. I mean, Zeb really, he's not a super deep character, quite honestly.
Yeah.
He's the heavy. So they don't
Yeah.
usually, I mean, he's Baze,
He
And Baze
is
didn't get
Baze.
a ton of
Right.
character either. So you don't really need a ton
They all
of character
dead.
moments from heavies. So I mean, it kind of made sense that he was just the guy that was there to keep the base running. And so aside from Callus and
Yeah.
Thrawn, I felt like it
Right.
was like kind of whatever. And I like that they used the droid from Ralph's drawing, but the Callus and Thrawn stuff is pretty good. And you
Yeah.
know that Thrawn is getting closer to the Rebels. And
Yes.
You're like, oh man,
Yes.
crap's about to hit the fan.
Yes.
And you know that he has got to be close to Callus. Like,
I think he
to
knows.
pouncing on him.
He
probably does.
he's
but
just waiting for more.
From this episode only,
Yeah.
you've got to know that he's like, Callus is getting pretty
Yeah.
obvious. Like,
I think
yeah.
that Thrawn knows enough, but he wants it to be better. Like when he unveils that he knows. I like the fact that as soon as you're pumping your fist for that Star Destroyer going down, that explosion, as soon as you're doing that, it actually, that fist pump is actually a punch to your own gut.
Yeah, I love how Thrawn takes that victory against him, that loss for him, and he's just like, well, now I've just narrowed out the planets. So
Yes.
it's really a win for me.
Yeah, and that
Classic
reminds
Thrawn.
me. That reminds me of the end of the end of the book, Lords of the Sith. When Isval is talking to Palpatine. Spoiler alert, if you haven't read Lords of the Sith, but when she talks about what he lost when losing that Star Destroyer, and he talks about, let me tell you about what I've gained, and about his strengthened team, including the person, not only Vader was strengthened, but the other people that he had overseeing various command stages in the area, and it just
Weeding out
the chaff,
false.
yeah, taking the chaff out, taking the dross out, whatever analogy you like, and just strengthening and making his team more efficient, and it's just like, wow. So that's where we are on Rebels episode Warhead.
And I don't know. I think you know this. What is the next episode?
Oh, I don't know that.
I think it should
Let's find it out.
Yeah.
While you're looking that up.
Oh, Trials of the Darksaber.
Yes,
That will be interesting.
That's the Mandalorian episode. Yes,
I am looking forward to that.
Yeah. I do agree with others who have said that I don't want too much Mandalorian lore coming too close to the original trilogy, but I guess they're going to do it. So I hope, I'm just hoping they do it really well. Trusting that they will.
I'm hoping, well, this is like a lot of hopes, but I'm hoping that they do something with the Old Republic, and then they do something with the old EU Mandos versus Jedi war.
That would be cool.
That would be cool.
Well,
and I hope that a lot of Mandalorian, because they've teased Mandalorian lore in Clone Wars and stuff, and they've dived in a little bit. So I'm kind of hoping we get a little more here, and then I'm hoping that eventually we'll get some old Republic.
What was
stuff.
cool about the little flash teaser for next week's the next episode, it was almost like they were showing flashes as though they were on cave walls, like cave images, to show that passage of time. And I think they are going to your point to show, history dating way back, and do it in a way that feels very rich and inspires awe.
I certainly hope so.
Yeah,
I'm looking forward.
I think they're going to do a good job of that. I just don't want the Mandalorians to be in full effect, butting up against the original trilogy to full capacity, like their full power. That to me would be kind of a letdown. Like that should be something that's kind of died away, and now there's a little revival here, a little mini revival before the OT. I can accept that. But other than that, we're going to be talking in this podcast about a lot of different things. The generations of Star Wars, we're going to be talking about Star Wars as it relates to, philosophy, the philosophy of Star Wars, and how philosophers and people who analyze Star Wars, on a philosophical level have looked at it. Also, the mythology of Star Wars and how it has grown into its own mythology, its own mythos, and how people have weighed in on that. Also, and thirdly, as an art form, as art itself. And that's where I'm currently at right now. I'm looking at a particular book by Camille Paglia, and how she has talked about in her book Glittering Images from Egypt to Star Wars, and how she's talked about specifically Revenge of the Sith, and how in her opinion it is the strongest work of art in the last 30 years, the one piece of art that she can say stands up to some of the works that have lasted over the centuries. And she lays out her case, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in the next episode. And also, so philosophy, mythology, art, and also the cultural phenomenon. And the cultural phenomenon part is part of how we fit in. I mean, we're a father-son duo. We're talking about how there's a generational aspect in fandom, and we are evidence of that. So that can't be disputed. And so we'll talk about why that is. One of the things Camille says in her book, Glittering Images, is about art. She says, for good art, why has it lasted? That's a good question. What are the reasons why it's lasted? That's the core of my question to other podcasters, firstly, and other fans, and even people that have worked in the industry on Star Wars or related to Star Wars. So, and with that, Dante's going to be doing a big review on the old Clone Wars animation series. That's it was a big coming in point for him in his Star Wars fandom, and talk a little bit about that.
Well, so there's 2 Clone Wars now. One of them, the Clone Wars that we'll be discussing, is no longer canon, and that is the one made by Gennady Tartakovsky, who also made Samurai Jack. So if you're a Samurai Jack fan, you're in luck. And he made a 2-season series that was basically to tie in from episode 2 to episodes 3. And it came out before episode 3. So, and a lot of it, it ties together really well, episode 2 and 3, especially like season 1 and 2. And I would like to compare it as well to Dave Filoni's Clone Wars, which is Star Wars The Clone Wars. There's Star Wars Clone Wars, which is the one we'll be discussing, and then there's Star Wars The Clone Wars, which is canon and is Filoni's. And I like to show kind of comparisons and how there's elements that apply to both, and maybe Dave pulled a little from this. Who knows?
Right.
And I know that George was at least gave the okay on the Clone Wars that Tartakovsky did. So Dave being really closely involved with George also might have influenced some things carrying over from series to series. So I think it'll be fun to discuss the characters, the differences in characters, in overall plot, and yeah, basically.
Good. If you have any questions about that, or anything you would like to anything you'd like to be covered in that review, send it to gostarwars2016@gmail.com. And again, if you have any sound files that you'd like to send for our news segment, starting just there, and we'll build on that. We're going to do a lot with sound in this podcast, hopefully. Send it to gostarwars2016@gmail.com. And with that, any closing thoughts, Dante?
Not really. I think we're good.
All right. May the Force be with you.
And that's a wrap.